we're going to focus on is components of self. So the pieces we're going to look at in this little section is self-awareness, self-concept, self-esteem, and self-discrepancy. In our case, we're going to look at self-awareness, and self-awareness is the ability to view yourself unique, distinct from others, and this is kind of based on George Herbert Mead. So we look at the idea of social comparison and observing and assigning meaning to others' behaviors and comparing it with ourselves. I think it's a natural part of the human being to want to compare ourselves with other people just to see how we're doing. So I think it's good to know that you're doing it, but also understanding the power of that. Another piece is the idea of critical self-reflection. They've discussed a couple of questions in particular. So what am I thinking and feeling? So taking a look at yourself, sometimes this idea of self-monitoring or understanding your own behaviors can be beneficial just in general. And then an analysis of why I'm thinking and feeling this way. What is the idea behind it? Sometimes our motivations are unconscious, so we may not really realize what it is that's motivating us at that moment, but it is good for us to have some background or be aware of how we're responding. How am I communicating? So check in on how you're doing. Personally, from my side, I think it's important for you to kind of be aware of the effectiveness of your communication at any given moment so that you have an understanding about if there's something that you can do better. Because we talk about the communication model, and when I'm encoding the message, am I doing a good job of making sure the other person on the other end understands my message? So how is the best way for me to do that? What are the best words for me to use? Is there something that I'm doing verbally or non-verbally that might be confusing to the people that I'm talking to? So how might I manage that? How are my thoughts and feelings impacting the other person? So am I getting the right results? Am I creating the situation that I want to create in order to make that communication happen? And then, of course, how can I improve? So what can I do better? I think I hang out in this land a lot myself personally. Like, how can I make this better? What can I do to make my communication clearer? But honestly, as a college professor, going through classes and teaching similar information over and over again gives me the opportunity to try to figure out what could I do that would make this better? What could I do to make this stronger? So really focusing on that way of improving yourself. So let's look at self-concept now. So we looked at this idea of self-awareness. And self-awareness is kind of your ability to focus the lens on yourself. And then now we're going to look at, now if we look at ourselves through that lens, what is that going to look like? So this is the next element, that next piece that's in our arsenal. So the things we want to focus on here are our beliefs, which are our convictions about the truth. Is this true or is this not true? And this is our belief system. This is based on whatever our vision, our view, our filter of what the world is. We created that ourselves. The next piece is attitudes. Attitudes are evaluations about how you think you're doing. Do I think I'm doing a good job? Do I think I'm doing a bad job? I'm going to look at that. And then that last piece is values. Interpreting enduring principles and guide our interpersonal action. So are things okay or not okay? Is this particular behavior working for me or not working for me? So I need to take a look at those elements as I go through. Now another piece of this self-concept is what we call Cooley's looking glass theory. So Charles Horton Cooley was a sociologist, and he came up with this idea or concept to help us understand how we might be looking at things. And so you look at how you think that you're being perceived. You might be looking at the other person's nonverbal communication. You might be looking at just how you think that you're doing based on what you're saying. Am I doing a good job? Do they understand what I'm saying? So you're going to look at how you think that you're being perceived by the other person. Another piece would be to evaluate yourself. So how am I doing in that situation? Am I doing a good job of evaluating the situation? And I'm also going to look at how this is going to impact my behavior. So this perceived self, how I think the other person's actually seeing me, they've got their own view of who you are. And you have your own view of who you are, but you have this view of how you think the other person's seeing you. And based on how you think the other person's seeing you, you're going to change your own behavior. If you think that the other person sees you maybe as being weak, maybe you'll shift your behavior so that you seem more confident and comfortable. I know when, as a teacher, you're standing in front of a class and the class is just staring at you and you're like talking away and you're like, the absence of information makes you make stuff up. Like, oh, this must mean that they're not listening to what I have to say, or I'm not speaking with enough enthusiasm, or I start changing my behavior depending on what I see the students in the class doing. So I'll oftentimes shift my behavior depending on the nonverbal communication, but there's no way for me to truly know what the class is thinking. The only thing I might truly know is that I'm seeing nonverbal communication. I just don't necessarily know what it means because I have no way of being inside their head. And the idea of self-concept clarity has to do with this sense of who you are and being clear about what that means. Like, who am I really? If you truly have a good sense of who you are as a person, that helps to be able to see through that window and see. It's like having a cloudy glass. Do you see yourself clearly, or do you not see yourself clearly? So having those elements is important. And then self-fulfilling prophecies, we have a tendency to, based on the way that we see ourselves, we're going to interact with other people in a certain way. Other people are going to generally respond to us in that way, and we create this little cycle about how that response looks. So if we feel comfortable and confident in ourselves, we're going to come across that way. Other people will respond to us probably like we're comfortable and confident. But if we're feeling fearful or we're uncomfortable, maybe we present ourselves as being nervous, then other people are going to feel that nervousness around us and oftentimes respond back to us that way. So I think that helps just to understand that sometimes our behavior is being influenced by what we perceive, and that's feeding back. Self-esteem is the next element we want to look at. So self-esteem so we've gone through this process of creating a lens, then we evaluate ourselves based on a lens, and then the overall view of whether that's positive or negative is how it's taken care of in self-esteem. So if we have negative view of ourselves, we're going to have lower self-esteem. If we have a positive view of ourselves, we'll have higher self-esteem. Now, under this one is this idea of the self-discrepancy theory and this belief in how you compare to what you think is your ideal self. Who is that you're supposed to have out there? So the ideal self is going to be characteristics that you want to possess, the perfect you. And then the ought to self is the person you wish or you expect to be. So we're not necessarily in that place yet, but we're trying to achieve that. Now, what we know is there's lots of really interesting research on what's happening to people because magazines and television and those elements are presenting this ideal self. And if we look at Instagram and we look at pictures of people on vacation, we're thinking, wow, they're living like an amazing life, like it's the best ever. And in reality, they're kind of going through the same kind of thing that you are, but they're presenting the view of this perfect ideal life. They don't want to generally tell you who they are, the messed up part of who they are, the part that's kind of screwed up. They don't want to talk about that part. What they want to talk about is they want to paint this picture, this rosy picture of their life being perfect. I mean, I think about when we get near the holidays and we get near Christmas and people get a little weird about it because they're trying to create this magical time and have this perfect experience of what Christmas is, and they stress themselves out. It's really more about being present and those kinds of elements, but it's really tough for us to do because we're constantly in this situation where we're trying to compare ourselves with other situations. So here's some suggestions that the textbook's offering you about how to make improvements in your self-esteem. The first step is to figure out what your beliefs are. So things that you might do, and one of the ones I have an interesting conversation around is money. What does money mean to me? So maybe if you're struggling with a specific area, maybe you focus on that. Because if I went to try to list all my beliefs, values, and attitudes on everything, that might be hard. So maybe if there's a particular area you can focus on, that might be a great place to start. So let's just say, for example, I'm going to focus on money. So if I have this view, I really don't even know. I guess I have an idea about what it costs for me to live. And then if I want to have the life I want to live, I don't know exactly how much more that would be. But one of the challenges I have in my situation is um, just my old belief systems about what money is. I think my dad told me that the Hartzes don't make money. And I thought, oh, that's what I've been given. My parents both given me these awesome ideas that money is hard to reach, or we don't have money in our family. So if I want to have something that's nicer, you know, I don't have a model for that. My family's never been able to show me what that looks like because it's not something that they experienced. It's not part of their belief systems. And we're going to come up and talk about that in just a little bit, this idea of where our belief systems come from. But it helps us to identify some of what those are and those elements that are kind of in the way. So what would my ideal self look like? What would I need to change in order to have that? Well, I mean, as a college professor, you can only teach so many classes, and there's only so many hours in the day. So if I could teach 15 classes, that would be great, but then I have to grade on the other side. And I spend all my time grading. So I can't continue to have more, so I have to do other things outside of that to make that work. So I do have other things I do outside of teaching in order to balance my life out and create other opportunities. But I think I would have to increase that. And there isn't really a way for me to teach more. There's a limit on how much I can teach just based on the amount of hours it takes to grade the number of classes I have. So I have to figure that out. It's a matter of thinking it through, kind of processing it. What would need to change? Is this ought to self, this self about who I should be, is it realistic? Is it something I can really achieve? And then maybe redefine the standards. So what is reasonable? Let's come up with what's reasonable based on the amount of time you have in the day, based on your current circumstances. I mean, you need to make money in order to survive. So, in the old days, we used to say, the normal college student was a student that maybe worked on campus. Their whole focus in their life was pretty much oriented around college, but then they would go out and party on the weekends or whatever. But this idea that their life is all oriented just around college, or they live on a college campus, I think that's probably a little bit more traditional. But they live on a college campus, they live in the dorm on the college campus, and in reality, most of the students that are going to college are working a job or multiple jobs, or some have families and they have children, and they have all kinds of interesting, challenging things that are happening in their life that make it difficult for them. So there isn't this idea of just focusing just on college, because people have a lot more that they have to get done in life. So what's reasonable? So you redefine the standards of what you think is possible, and then create an action plan for what that looks like. So figuring out those pieces and those elements so that you end up with a strong self-concept and self-esteem so you feel good about yourself. It's not about doing things perfect, because if we did things perfect, then we wouldn't be doing anything. We have to go out and make mistakes, and we have to go out and bump our nose, and that's part of the process. That's part of how we learn. I know that's frustrating, but that's the way it's done. All right, there you go. So hopefully that covers it with the elements that we discussed with self-awareness, self-concept, self-esteem, and there you go. Thanks.